Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Can you guys hear me? Somebody? Good morning, Anissa, Matt, Brittany.
You can chat. Hello?
I can hear you now.
Okay, it's super weird. Yeah, you can chat. We can hear you.
Okay, good. I was just making sure you all can hear me. I can hear you now, too. Welcome to my humble Tucson abode.
Hey, I can see myself.
I can see you, too. Oh, God, my back desk is a mess. So we'll wait for a couple more people to come on, because I know that Russell and them were waiting, and then they logged off because I think they thought it started at 8. So, Anissa, so far I have traumatic brain injuries, spinal cord synergy patterns, and then a brain dump for the whiteboard. Is there anything else you would like covered?
Traumatic brain injuries.
Yeah, I've got that.
Like a quick touch on like lesions, maybe.
Okay, so in the idea of CVAs or in the idea of TBI.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's honestly.
Okay. Normally you just have to enable your mic or video to get it to work. That's all. This vaping stuff is crazy. In comes Russell. I'm not the only one with a big cup of coffee, I see.
A big what?
Big cup of coffee.
Oh my gosh. There's never a big enough coffee.
Got Lorena, we've got Russell on. Good morning, Kristen. Good morning.
Morning. You can't see my face, can you?
No, I cannot see your face. Don't worry.
Okay. Good.
I mean, I can remotely turn the camera on if you want me to. No, just kidding. I can't. Good morning, Drew and Tata. So there is the group chat as well that you can type questions in if you come up with questions while I'm talking or anything like that. Or if you can't get the time to kind of sneak in on it. Right now on my list, I have brain injuries, I have CVAs, including lesion locations, spinal cord injuries, nerve root function, synergy patterns, and then kind of a brain dump for what to put on your whiteboards then. So if anyone has anything else they'd like to cover, let me know. Okay.
You haven't posted anything yet, right?
Nothing yet. Nope.
Okay, cool.
As far as what do you mean posting?
Well, like shared anything?
No, I have not shared anything. I just shared my wonderful face. That's it.
Cool. All right, cool.
We still have a couple minutes till kind of everyone gets on and gets awake. I've been watching a medical special on the whole vaping illness this morning, so.
And what did you find out?
People are stupid for putting stuff in their lungs that they don't know where it comes from. That's basically what I found out.
Are they surprised they're dying?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what I mean. Let's inhale a superheated vapor. That sounds like a good idea for our lungs. All right, got it, Lorena. Is everyone nice and nervous? Yeah, I know that laptop. Thank you. I'm already on it.
I am.
I'd be worried if you weren't. Such a pleasant doorbell. Jen has joined the call. Not sure who Jen is, but welcome, Jen. Give about another 2 minutes for everyone to kind of wake up and get on, and then we'll get started here. So while I'm waiting here and kind of waiting for everyone to come on, I'm right now kind of revamping the communications course, which is loads of fun. Is there anything you guys felt was over covered in the communications course or that could have been covered better in the communications course that I might improve the communications course for the new cohort? I mean, other than lay and lie. As you lay something down the table while you lie down.
I don't know. That whole thing is weird. Dude.
I'm looking at it. It was a long time ago for you guys. I know that. So it was definitely, from what I can tell from the people that took the course and looking at the scores, it was a challenge for even some of the better students. I'll also post a link to my Discord channel as well. Do you guys, any of you use Discord? If you use Discord, I'm on Discord pretty much all day long. Between here and, you know, my other jobs. But I guess I can get going. I think we've got a good bit. We've got 11 people on. Therapy at a physical therapist in a position. Okay, I can cover that then, Chata. Thank you. All right, so good morning. Let's see the resume. All right, cool. Thank you, Drew. So it is about 9 o'clock here in Tucson. I guess 9 o'clock in Vegas. You know, we have the oddball Drew, who's like noon where she's at. So, you know, we can't all move to the retirement state. But she's in Florida visiting us long distance. So we're going to start going here. So I have a couple things that people have sent in for me to cover. Let me figure out how to share my screen. Share. There we go. So where is my Word document? There it is. All right, so these are the couple of things that people had requested kind of to talk. Can everyone see the Word document? I'm assuming so.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, good, thank you. So we'll kind of go down through the list. If there's something that pops up as we're going down through, we'll kind of cover that. One thing I can say for all of these, whether it's traumatic brain injury, CVA, spinal cords, even synergy patterns, and down to the tricep idea, and even down to the brain dump for the whiteboard. Honestly, the first thing I did when I sat down at my desk when I was taking my test way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and we took it in paper, was what I do with my whiteboard is I went in and I wrote my cranial nerves, my basic dermatomes, and myotomes. And I didn't get really specific. I just kind of gave the overall basics, you know, this is where C5 is and this is what it interacts with. You know, C5's biceps region, right? And just went down through it. It kind of ties back to triceps. Triceps, I believe when Dr. Telly taught it as C6, C7. It's more C6 to C6 to C8 is about where it typically goes, according to the Asia setup. So any of those regions, just know that if you don't have C8, you won't have full triceps. You can't test C8 completely without triceps completely as well. But these things here, I mean, the cranial nerves, the dermatomes, and myotomes will get you through a lot of all these questions up here. They just tend to help us as we're going through. Let's talk about TBI. So what kind of questions do we have on TBIs? Just the general impacts of them, what happens afterwards, what kind of stuff are we looking at with TBIs that seem to be the issue? Let's see my chat. I figure out how to turn the chat on. So I've got something on the chat. Alt H, that's how I turn on chat, okay. That didn't help. Still in Word. All right, let me stop share here real quick. I'm going to draw on brachial plexus. If you think the brachial plexus will help you, then go ahead. There's not going to be a lot of specific questions on the brachial plexus. It's not like there's going to be 50 questions. So for the brachial plexus, that's going to fall in your bronze category of review questions specifically for the boards. So that's the main questions you're going to get with brachial plexus are going to be things like Erb's palsy, whole arm palsy, and Klumpke's palsy. But for the most part, yeah, as long as you know that anytime you're dealing with a palsy of the upper extremity that is due to a traction, typically at birth, that's really what you need to know. I don't think you'll need to draw the whole brachial plexus. I didn't, but I didn't get a lot of brachial plexus questions. I did get a lot of autonomic dysreflexia questions because it's an easy safety question. So please remember autonomic dysreflexia, right? Autonomic dysreflexia is what? Does anyone actually want to answer that? Everyone's on mute. It's great. I love it. Starts at about T6, good, right? It can be above T6. It can be below T6. The main thing is autonomic dysreflexia is the pinched catheter. Remember that. So that typically means the catheter is being pinched off. They're going to show signs of diaphoresis, confusion possibly later on with it. They're not going to feel right. A lot of times they feel like they get the sense of dread, what it's called, where they kind of feel like they're going to die. And that's really uncomfortable for them at that point. And the main thing you need to do is, again, what we typically start thinking of when the patient starts getting dizzy and diaphoretic is sitting them down. But if we sit them down, we can raise their blood pressure. So we got to keep them upright as much as possible, check and clear the catheter. Usually the reason we get autonomic dysreflexia again is because somebody has taken and pinched off the catheter and didn't reopen it, usually after draining it. But back to TBIs. So with TBIs, the main thing you're going to encounter with TBIs, I'm going to say, is the LCFS, the Ranchos Los Amigos Level of Cognitive Functioning Scale. So you have to know that. How much do you have to know it? You have to know the stages. And the main thing you really want to know about that is the higher the number on the LCFS, the better the patient's getting, right? So down to 0 and 1, or your patients are going to be basically comatose. And then up in the higher numbers is where you end up with patients that are actually starting to function and almost ready for discharge to home. The main question you're going to get on those patients are going to be where you're looking at, you're given a very specific level of the LCFS, and then you have to determine the safety issues for treating them. You know, whether you're looking at treating them in an open environment or a closed environment, whether you're looking to treat them around other patients or not around other patients, right? So anytime you're in that confused and agitated period of a traumatic brain injury, you definitely want to keep it in a closed environment away from other people, right? You want to keep it as private as you can so that you can maintain their focus on you. They can maintain their focus on, the therapy. And when you have a patient that's confused, the one thing you should not completely expect from them is carryover from the previous day, right? And especially if in that confused, agitated state, if you come in and say to them, hey, let's talk about what we did yesterday. Well, they don't even remember what they had for breakfast this morning. And now you're asking them about something that happened 24 hours ago. All you're going to do is kick up that agitation. And you don't want to do that. That's going to make your therapy session worse. So you've got to find things that soothe them. They need stuff from home that'll help soothe them and make them a little bit more demure, a little bit more pliable to therapy, right? When you get up into where you're starting to get out of the confused state and you're starting to get into the appropriate state, that's when we start expecting carryover, and that's where we start allowing them a little bit more independence. If you have a confused patient, you also probably want them on a bed alarm when they're in bed because they're going to try to get up on their own. We talked about that with the one patient in neuro, the total knee replacement, when we taught the neuro class that was part of your comps, right? The patient and also the TBI that was part of your comps. They're both a little bit confused. They're both a little agitated. And that means if they get up, they're probably going to fall. So you need to have somebody nearby them. The other thing you need to know for TBI specifically is Q counter Q. So you want to make sure you remember that. And Q counter Q is where they have a blow on one side of the head. For example, look at this case. We're talking about maybe a hockey player. And the hockey player gets checked into the wall. And they go face first. So they're face first, they hit the front of their head. That's going to be the Q injury, which would be the frontal lobe. The counter Q injury then is going to be on the opposite side of the brain, because the brain is going to be propelled backwards and slosh against the backside of the skull. At that point, the backside of the brain, the occipital lobe, is going to be the counter Q injury. So you should be able to differentiate by knowing your brain lobes, what might happen if they have an injury in this specific lobe. Now, you don't have to know every specific thing about the lobes, but you should know that, you know, your visual is back in your occipital region, right? Your higher functioning, kind of your impulse control, everything like that's up here in the frontal lobe. That's why kids, when they're smaller, right, they lack that frontal lobe kind of inhibition that we have as we're older. You know, when you want to look at somebody that to just get out of the way and they're irritating you, you have the ability to restrain from saying that, whereas kids don't. That's why they call people names and get angry at other people. Your centers of hearing are above your ears. That kind of makes sense. And then you have your Wernicke's to your Broca's. Yep, I can cover the Asia, not a problem. We'll cover that when we get to spinal cords. The other thing you need to know, mainly with TBI, is also going along with strokes, is the difference between Wernicke's or fluent aphasia and Broca's or broken aphasia, right? That's the main way to remember it. I taught you that a while ago. You know, fluent aphasia, the problem with fluent aphasia is they may not fully understand everything you're saying, and you may not understand what they're saying back to you. Remember, that could be the one where everything comes out kind of disjoined and wrong words come out, and they know what they want to say, but they may not be able to get it across, right? Broca's is where you get that halting, broken speech. They try to get it out. It's different than stuttering, where stuttering actually may have something to do with Broca's area. They're still looking into that. So you want to be able to define and look at, when you get a traumatic brain injury, what does this person look like? And usually when you get traumatic brain injury questions, they're looking for the most safe environment or assistive device to treat them with. So you want to just take and make sure you go down through and look and go, oh, okay, so, you know, they're in a confused, agitated state. Obviously, I don't want to give them a single point cane. That would not be a good idea, because number one, they're probably not going to understand how to use it. Number two, you may get hit with the cane. You know, so you've got to think, oh, okay, well, this patient might be more appropriate to be walking in the parallel bars in a closed environment, where maybe I want to take them up there during a period of time where the therapy gym is quiet and there's less patients, such as lunchtime or right before lunchtime, or maybe just after lunchtime, so that you're kind of planning and strategizing your day. You know, other thing for TBIs is just know your Glasgow Coma Scale, right? So your coma scale is going to determine, when the patient's in that kind of lowest level of cognitive functioning, what you can expect from them. And honestly, most of the time that you get patients going to be Glasgow Coma Scale, they're going to be talking about a really kind of low level functioning patient. Most of the time at that point, the only thing we're doing is range of motion and maybe some edge of bed sitting. There's not going to be a lot going on if the patient's in a coma state. Does anyone else have anything on TBIs they encountered they wanted to ask about that you can think of? Bueller. All right. So let's talk about CVAs then. So CVAs, much like TBIs, a lot of your questions are going to be kind of gauged around safety. So what is most safe for this patient to do, right? You need to know the difference between a hemorrhagic CVA and an ischemic CVA, right? Ischemic being the blockage that can eventually lead to the hemorrhagic CVAs. So you need to know the difference. Most of the times, we're not going to see a lot of hemorrhagic CVAs because most of them, unfortunately, die in the ER. or ED, whichever you want to call it. So you need to be focused more on that kind of that CVA that's going to be more ischemic. And as soon as an area becomes ischemic, a part of the brain is going to become hypoxic. That means that part of the brain is going to die off. And that's what the questions about the CVAs are going to be, is if you have, you know, a CVA in the anterior inferior cerebellar artery, what are some of the presentations going to look like? Well, the cerebellum is going to be affected. Cerebellum's affected, balance will be affected. So that goes back to just knowing your brain lobes again. If you know kind of the area of the brain where they're talking about, you can usually answer the CVA questions. But that again just goes back to reviewing kind of those lobes and that circle of Willis, right? I just put a bonus question on that, or not a bonus, a regular question on my patho test the other day that asked what the circle of Willis was, and yeah, I got some interesting answers for that. But remember, the circle of Willis is at the base of the brain. It's that multi-feed blood system that allows the brain to get blood from both your carotids and also from your vertebral arteries, so that if you get a blockage somewhere along the lines, there's a multi-feed system. So if it can't go to the right side, it can go back to the left side and still provide blood to that area. Although if you have a complete blockage, obviously nothing's going to get through. You also need to know the different types of aneurysms, right? The fusiform versus saccular aneurysms. So knowing whether it's a bubbled aneurysm or whether it's ballooned. So also, yeah, going back to that, knowing that your saccular aneurysms are going to be more likely to rupture because of the fact that they're going to compromise the integrity of the wall of the blood vessel a lot more, because it's stretching a small area over a really large area. It's causing a balloon effect, right? So let me see here. Share. Let me get a whiteboard brought up. So remember, you have your fusiform aneurysms that kind of go like this. And then you have your saccular aneurysms that are kind of like that. This one here is weakening that cell wall a lot more, which is going to cause a lot more problems with that cell wall, a lot more likely to rupture. This one here, when it ruptures, so this one here, when it ruptures, it's going to be a bigger rupture overall. This one, if they can catch it, you know, the lower one, if they catch it enough, they can sometimes seal that off and keep it from getting too bad. But if you get the whole wall blowout, you're kind of in trouble. This also ties back to that abdominal aortic aneurysm for heart problems and stuff like that as well. Please bear in mind, my drawings on the computer are not any better than they are on the whiteboard. Also then for, you know, when you're dealing with stuff like that, how do I go back to my draw? Is this the draw? Yeah, there we go. That's a line. I want the freeform draw. There we go. All right. So also when you're dealing with those cerebrovascular accidents, in School Builders and also in Therapy Ed, there are sections that cover specific types of CVAs. So what happens if you have a AICA stroke? What happens if you have an ACA stroke, right? What happens if you have pontine stroke? What happens if you have a lacunar infarct? Review those, take a few moments to look over them. You know, looking at what happens if you have a stroke in the posterior portion of the brain. If you have a stroke in the posterior portion of the brain, you know that your vision's back there. That means vision's overall going to be affected, and that's going to be a problem. You know, if you have a stroke in the anterior part of your brain, again, you know, impulse control is going to be affected. If you have it on the temporal lobe or the parietal lobe, possibly hearing, possibly speech. Some motor control is going to be affected there. So you just, as long as you kind of know your brain levels and your brain sections, you can usually figure out the answers to your questions on those. I know I'm really simplifying it, but overall it's really that simple when you look at those questions. It's not a trick question. They're asking you, you know, if you have a brain in your occipital lobe, what's the patient going to look like? What are they safe to do? Well, they might need things that are larger, right? If you're gonna be handing them stuff to read, or if you're gonna be giving them a home exercise program, you might want larger text, or maybe something in audio form that they can hear, right? If they're having any problems with impulse control, again, we're gonna probably wanna put them on a bed alarm so that They're not trying to get up out of bed as much as they are. And then, so the strokes then strokes and TBIs kind of tie into those synergy patterns, which people had a question of. So when we talk about synergy patterns, typically we're talking about abnormal synergy patterns, but we also have normal synergy patterns. Normal synergy patterns are ideally what we want. That's what allows us to walk, right? A normal synergy pattern would be the reciprocal arm swing with gait. That's a normal functional synergy pattern. When we take a step forward, right, the reciprocal arm swings with that leg. That's a normal synergy pattern. Abnormal synergy patterns go back to primitive reflexes, right? So if a patient has an abnormal synergy pattern, they may present with ATNR. Remember, ATNR is the fencer's reflex, right? Excuse me. So we may use those for a time being in order to help them get up. If we know that we're having problems where they're very spastic, and we can get one of their arms up here and use the other arm to help push up, we may use the ATNR to kind of get them moving. But overall, what we want to try to do with those abnormal synergy patterns, and we either have usually flexion synergy patterns or extension synergy patterns, is get those reintegrated by doing patterns that inhibit them. So we want to start thinking, if we're having an extension synergy problem, we might want to start working towards flexion so we can start inhibiting it, because that way we can use reciprocal inhibition, right? The ability for one muscle to contract and the other muscle to relax in order to start reintegrating those synergy patterns, right? And then along with that, you've got to remember your decorticate posturing and decerebrate posturing, right? I think cerebrate. I think I spelled that wrong. There we go. So your decorticate and cerebrate. So just real quick, can everyone see the whiteboard as I'm typing, except for the person that's on the phone? Can anyone just say that they can't see it? That way I know. Anyone? Bueller? Anissa, can you see the whiteboard?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure I was not drawing and typing for nobody. Thank you.
No, you're good.
So these, both decerebrate and decorticate posturings, right? They're both abnormal synergy patterns. Decorticate, the stuff pulls to the core, right? Decerebrate is extension. And that's kind of where I taught you here, right? That E kind of clues you in to the extension over here, whereas we have core in this one, so it's pulling to the core. Either of these postures that you're dealing with, both those postures eventually end up with the same leg pattern, plantar flexed and kind of extended, because the legs don't change whether it's decorticate or decerebrate. What changes are the arms, right? With decorticate, you kind of pull up into what I call bunny hop position, right? Whereas with decerebrate, you extend back, my webcam's not large enough, and extend back into an extension pattern with, you know, that abnormal posture, right? And I remember I talked about decorticate is bad, but decerebrate itself is worse. That's usually a more dangerous level if they're in that decerebrate posturing. If you remember, I showed you the video of the, I believe I showed you the video of the NFL player, I believe it was a Steeler that got hit, and then when he went down, he went immediately into decorticate posturing and just kind of tucked up into that bunny hop position. That meant that he definitely had a traumatic brain injury. Ironically enough, they put him right back into the game, which tells you that they really didn't do an effective screen on him. But whenever you have either of these postures, right? So if I'm pulling into the core, I'm going to want to work the opposite way, right? I'm going to want to work on extension. If I'm pulling into extension, I'm going to want to work on flexion to counter that synergy pattern. So you just kind of have to look at what your patient's got as far as synergy and think, okay, so how do I counter these things? What can I do that's different, right? Tapping is a great thing, right? So if I'm up and I'm flexed up here, it means I'm getting spasticity a lot in my biceps and all my internal rotators, right? Everything is nice and tight. I can use some tapping, right? And I can use some active extension patterns in my triceps to try to override those biceps from being so spastic. You can also use different types of, I totally spelled spasticity wrong. That was great. Whatever. Spastic.
We know what you mean.
Yeah, thank you. My brain's not functioning yet because one, right? But if you have spastic, you can use tapping, right? You can use ice massage is another great thing to help kind of calm that down, or any type of cold, right? Cryotherapy helps calm down spasming. I had a kid a few weeks ago that I saw that was really, really spastic in his quads when he was walking. And what it was is he had an extension synergy going on. So when he was trying to fire his quads off, his hamstrings were firing and pulling his leg backwards instead of allowing him to progress forwards. So I was using a little combination of a little bit of cold on the back of his hamstrings to stop them from firing, and a lot of tapping, I know you can't see it, but a lot of tapping on the quads to try to get them to fire the right way. You can also do tapping on the muscles that are causing the spasticity. It just depends on kind of where you want to trigger it and what you're looking at. He wasn't a TBI, he was a kid with cerebral palsy, and that kind of ties into this, because if you look at it, cerebral palsy is nothing more than a stroke early in life. So lesion locations, right? That kind of ties into that as well. When you're dealing with lesion locations, when you have your CVAs, what you're looking at, again, is where on the circle of Willis does the lesion fall, right? And a lot of them will tell you, right? If it says anterior, inferior, cerebellar artery, that tells you, right? Tells you it's going to the cerebellum, and it's going to the front and lower portion of the cerebellum. I see a chat here. Yeah, Drew, so that's a pretty good, yeah, so to counter the synergy, you're gonna work going in the opposite direction typically. And again, I may use some of that synergy, or you may use some of that synergy pattern. If you know the patient's got a flexion synergy and you're having difficulty getting them out of bed, I may, for a short period of time, use that abnormal synergy pattern to help kind of to bring that trunk flex forward to help get them upright and seated. But eventually I have to integrate it, because otherwise when I get them up and walking, they're going to have a flex trunk, and it's not going to promote proper walking pattern. So I eventually have to integrate it and get them going the opposite way. But yes, typically you're going to work on the opposite motions to kind of inhibit that pattern that we don't want to happen. Oh, there we go. And I can put group chat over there so I can see everything. Isn't that great? This thing is awesome. Let me think what else. So, you know, and then if we have something like a pontine stroke, right? We know pontine stroke would be, why would pontine stroke be bad, 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 bad? What are you thinking about the pontine? What's it feed into? Says it in its name, right? It's feeding into the pons. So therefore, you know, we're getting a lot of our autonomic regulation down there. It's getting into that brainstem, and we know we got problems, right? Same thing if we have anything on any of the arteries that would feed things like, you know, the brainstem, anything along that lines. Or, you know, it may say something about, you know, you're talking about the labyrinthine artery. At that point, labyrinthine, you're thinking it's going into the ear. So probably they're going to have vestibular issues. So those are the kind of things you want to look at when you're looking at any type of dealing with a stroke pattern. Is, okay, I'm looking at the patient. What part of the brain is being affected? Does it give me a level of cognitive functioning? If it gives me a level of cognitive functioning, I immediately go down and look for the most safe and most appropriate answer, right? If you have a patient that's really high on the LCFS, and you know, they're functional and there's, you know, no major issues, and they're up in the purposeful appropriate section, you're probably not going to need to take them to the parallel bars. At that point, we can start working on stuff that's more appropriate to them, ADLs, stuff like that. But again, if you have somebody that's in that confused scale, you may not want to do that because that's going to confuse them and make them worse. So not until we get into that kind of that appropriate stage do we really want to start working on, you know, activities of daily living, recall patterns, stuff like that. The other thing with stroke pattern or stroke patients and TBIs, you should be working a little bit of cognitive work with them at all times. So getting them to do more than one thing at once, right? Talk to you while they're walking. Now also bonus to that is, you know, they're breathing if they're talking to you. Because otherwise I'd be sitting here and be out of breath talking to you guys for this past half hour. Right? So you want to make sure you kind of combine a little bit of, you know, a little bit of cognitive work with everything you do. And sometimes you can use that cognitive work to overcome those synergy patterns as well, because that's kind of that theory of that gate control, right? The brain can only take either one form of input. So if it's getting the bad input from the synergy pattern and we disrupt it by making them think about something else, sometimes we can counter that abnormal synergy pattern by making them do something like math, right? Which I know you all loved that class. It was so much fun. I know it. But it allows that brain to work, right? And just remember those gate control theories can work on that as well. It's just talking about how you're going to get those synergy patterns to kind of work. I had found a great thing from the Brain Injury Foundation, I think Center for Brain Measurement and Outcomes. I'll post that onto the Blackboard for it. There was a nice little write-up on both the LCFS and also on synergy patterns. So I'll post that for you guys to read as well. Make a note of that. Yep. I'm just putting a note in the chat here. Center for Brain Injury. Just so that I don't forget, because I can actually go back and look through the chat. Is there anything else on TBIs or CVAs that you guys encountered that you weren't grasping that I could possibly help? Yay, erase. And I will post this lecture or chat once I figure out how to upload it to YouTube. It's downloading. Evidently, it puts a little video file in my computer, and then I can upload it to YouTube as well. Is there anything else you guys can think of? I'll give you a few moments to kind of wake your brains up. Everyone has enough coffee, right? You're all caffeinated enough? I'm running out here, so I'm going to get really grumpy soon. Anything else? Right versus left CVA. Yes, so, okay, good question, Russell, thank you. So the key thing, good idea. So when we're labeling CVAs, right? So if it says your patient is a right hemisphere CVA, right? Or most of the times it's just going to say right CVA. That means the right side of the brain is affected. So be aware of that. When they label the CVA, they're not labeling the part of the body that's affected. They're labeling the part of the brain that's affected. So if I say a right CVA, that typically, for the most part, I'm going to stretch this box out a little bit here. That typically, for the most part, means the left side of the body is affected. And then depending upon the type of stroke, whether it's an ACA, AICA, PCA stroke, you may have upper extremity more involved than lower extremity more involved than upper extremity, or both the extremities equally involved. But if they label it as a right CVA, they're calling it, that means they're saying it's a right hemisphere CVA, which means that the left side of the body is typically going to be affected as far as your boards go, okay? Now, in the real world, sometimes that changes, but we're not worried about the real world right now. We're worried about getting you guys through the boards. And when they're talking about it on the boards, if they call it a right CVA, left side of the body is going to be affected, all right? And if it's a left hemisphere, I can type today. That means they're going to label it as a left CVA. That means the right side of the body is affected. So that's when you're going to look at helping that. So that goes back to the positioning question. I think it was Shata posted it earlier, right? It was. So it's talking about, so her question was, one of the questions from therapy at exams, physical therapist assistants positioning a patient in bed who has spastic left hemiparesis, right? So that means if I'm spastic, I'm typically gonna be up in that kind of decorticate posturing. So my scapula is gonna be retracted. My arm's gonna be as internally rotated as I can, right? What I wanna do is get myself out of this posture. And so when I'm positioning a patient in bed, especially for bed rest, because when you think about it, when I'm sleeping, what's going to happen to all these muscles when I'm sleeping? I'm going to turn off that autonomic control causing that spasticity because my brain is going to bed, right? That's why you wake up into a pool of drool in the morning, because your muscles that clench your jaw so much may not have functioned all night. And so now you've got a pool of drool laying there because your muscles were all relaxed in your mouth and you drooled everywhere. So that means we're going to want to take from this posture here, right, and come out here and put them out, right? We want to get them into a posture. That's kind of that positioning and draping posture I showed you, where you kind of lay them down and you have the arm up and out and the pillow's kind of supporting them. And you're going to want to put them in side lying, but I'm side lying on the, so if my left side was affected in this one. Yes, left side is affected. That means I'm going to want to lie them on my right side, with the left side kind of extended as much as possible, protracted as much as possible, abducted and externally rotated as much as possible, to kind of counter this paralysis here, or this paresis here, where I'm all nice and tight. So you want to be aware, kind of thinking, if I'm in this posture, where do I want to put them in for posturing? Well, I want to put them out in this posture, right? You want to go opposite of what it is. I don't want to know what you're laughing about, but that's great. So, oh, stop it. All right. So that's kind of the posturing idea you want to go to. Kind of goes along the same idea, even if you're not talking about a CVA. If you're talking about somebody that's got a flexion spasticity, when we splint them, right? If I've got an elbow flexion spasticity, when we splint them or serocast them, I'm going to serocast them or splint them into extension, so that I can overcome the spasticity of the biceps. That's what I'm doing here. I'm going to try to put them out as much out here to overcome that spasticity and kind of start stretching them out. Yeah. But I hope that makes sense, but that ties into that question, right? Now, the only time, and this actually ties into spinal cords, CVAs, TBIs, the only time that we would not stretch something in the opposite direction of the spasticity is that case of tenodesis grip, right? Tenodesis grip is that functional grip we may want to maintain if we think that the patient may never get full functional grip back, right? We all have the ability to kind of do this with our hand and do that 6-pack, remember that? So I don't remember if they are. But anyway, the 6-pack that Dr. Reskin had you do, right? All that fun stuff. We have the ability to do that. But if I'm not going to get my functional grip back and I can allow my fingers to kind of contract up like this, what I can do then is use my wrist extensors. So my wrist extensors to tighten my grip, and it'll allow me to pick things up, right? Because now what I can do is put it in here, and as long as I extend my wrist, I've got a functional grip of that object. And that allows patients to self-feed, right? But if I go through and I'd stretch these fingers out, now when I go back, I don't have that functional grip anymore. So you have to be thinking about that. Mainly OTA typically orders when we're talking about that functional grip pattern. So make sure you kind of look at the OTA eval if you have somebody that's got a CVA or a TBI or a SCI, just to make sure we're not looking to keep that tenodesis grip. I find it usually typically when I'm dealing with that, I just ask the OT. I just say, hey, are we looking to keep tenodesis? Are we not looking to keep tenodesis? Because that way I can focus when I'm working them, and maybe getting a little bit of extension when I'm pushing off and stuff like that to help stretch those fingers out. Erase. Where's my erase? There's my erase. Boom, gone. Look at that. It's pretty. All right. I'm having fun with this. No problem. Okay. We got that then, Shata. So we got CVAs. We got TBI, spinal cords. All right. So remember with spinal cords, right? I'm going to stretch this box all the way out here. So we have lots of space to write. There we go. So we're talking about SCIs, all right? Spinal cord injuries. we're going to be talking about two different levels, or two different things. We're going to talk about that injury level and the neurological level. Very, very rarely do the questions ask you about the injury level. And if they're going to ask, if there's a question about the injury level, it's then going to refer back to the neurological level, because that's the main thing that we're worried about in physical therapy and occupational therapy and respiratory therapy and all our therapies, right? Because the neurological level is going to tell us what can the patient feel and do. All this tells us is where they got hurt, right? So if a patient is, let's say, a T5 injury level, that means they were shot, stabbed, pulled apart, drawn and quartered. Oh no, drawn and quartered wouldn't work. But they have a flexion, extension injury to that area, anything along those lines. That tells us just where the injury occurred. In reality, that doesn't tell us a whole heck of a lot of anything, right? But if they're a T5 neurological level, right? So here's, let me get my drawing out here, right? So here's my T5. Oh, this is harder than it looks with the mouse. Anything below that is going to have some form of impairment. And even at that level, most of the times you're going to have impairment. We're going to be looking for the neurological level that is going to be above that, right? So we're going to be looking at, you know, something above T5 being our neurological level. So at best, our neurological level would be T4. And remember, when we talk about neurological level, let's see if can I redo that area up there? Select. There we go. Text. Hey, let me get into that area. There we go. So when we talk about this neurological level, right? This is the level of the spinal cord that has both full sensory and motor function bilaterally, right? So we have a patient that's a T5 injury. The best they might be is a T4, right? So that's going to tell us that if it says neuro level, so injury level T5, neuro level T4. What we need to know is at T4, where's the dermatomes at? At T4, what muscles are we talking about? What can the patient do? The good news is when we're down to that T4 level, we have almost, I mean, pretty much all of our upper extremities, right? We definitely have functional breathing. We have everything like that. That's good. So we have a lot of our upper extremity function. This patient overall is at a neural level of T4 is going to function pretty well. But, and I'll throw the but in there, is their trunk control is going to be really weak. Their legs aren't maybe function, right? So we have to look at know our myotomes and go, okay, so if I have a T4, I've got most of my arm function, right? That means this patient's probably going to be ambulatory in a wheelchair, right? Or mobilized in a wheelchair. They're not going to need an electronic wheelchair. And we should be pushing a non-electronic wheelchair for this patient. They should be getting a regular push wheelchair, right? But we're going to need stuff like trunk supports. We're going to need maybe some seat belts to keep them in place. Definitely going to need a good seat cushion to put their pelvis in the proper alignment, right? But this T4 level, that's honestly a kind of a dream. Most of the time, you're going to be 2 to 3 levels up. So they're T1 to T2. Just because if you have an injury here, you're going to get swelling up the spinal cord. It's going to allow for a little bit more cell death up the spinal cord. And so until you get up into here is where you're going to get, so 2 to 3 levels above the injury level is where you're going to get into that functional neurological level. And that's going to be what that Asia assessment is for. The Asia assessment, which somebody asked a question about, right? Asia assessment is used to test dermatomes and myotomes to determine neurological level. So what we're going to do is if I had a T5 injury, right, I know that I'm not going to have full function at T5, but that's where I'm going to start. So I'm going to start at T5, test the dermatome for T5, test the myotomes for T5, test the dermatomes and myotomes for T4, test the dermatomes for myotomes for T3, test the dermatomes and myotomes for T2. And I may come to T2 and all of a sudden I've got full sensory and motor bilaterally. And I'm like, okay, I've got my patient's neuro assessment there. They are a T2 neurological level spinal cord injury. Then the last thing I have to go and check is if the patient, because the other thing this age assessment will help us find out is, do they have bowel and bladder control, right? And the reason we need to know if they have bowel and bladder control is because this will help us tell if the patient is either a complete, say T2 SCI, or an incomplete T2 SCI. A complete would mean they have no bowel or bladder control. An incomplete would mean they have some or full bowel and bladder control. And this is where you say, but Mr. McKeever, if they have a spinal cord injury at T5, how do they have functional effects down at the bowel and bladder? Because you have zones of partial preservation may have happened. You may have some sacral sparing that has happened, which sacral sparing is part of the zones of partial preservation. And that's what we're going to look at and say, hey, this patient is an incomplete because maybe they have functional bladder control, but they lack full bowel control, right? That patient's going to have a better outcome overall, because then we know that this injury up here may not have destroyed all the stuff below it, right? All this stuff down here. We know that it may not have gotten all this. Oh, wow, look, I can take that out. Isn't that cool? So that's when we have to figure out what functionally they have, okay? So that's when we talk about, you know, zones of partial preservation, meaning that there are zones or spinal cord levels below injury level that are functioning. And then sacral sparing is where we have sacral levels that are functioning. That shouldn't be. Right? Now I say shouldn't be. So, oh good, at what point do we lose bowel and bladder, right? Bowel and bladder typically is going to be typically anywhere S4, S5, and above. That's why I said this is so rare. Because at T5, I should not have this. It should be gone. But this is where spinal cord, this is, again, this is why I really, 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 really love neuro. Because if I'm at T5 injury level, I shouldn't have S4, S5. But you'll go in and the patient has it. Okay, I'll cover myelomeningocele. I can cover that then. Good. So that's where we kind of have to look and go, well, why is this happening? Well, because the brain is weird and the spinal cord's weird and we just got weird functioning below it. It happens sometimes. It's one of those weird things that happen and we may not always understand why it happens. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Undo. Can I undo that? Oh no, I can't undo it. Oh well. Oh yeah, I can. There it is. That's one of those weird things that happen that we just go, okay, I have no idea why the patient has that function, but I'm going to use it because, again, if they've got functional bowel and bladder, we can use that to our advantage. What do I have back here? Why is this back here? Erase that. There we go. And so they can actually have a better functional life with it, right? So we'll talk about the difference for the myelomeningocele in a little bit. So does that help with spinal cord injuries overall? the main thing here, again, that you guys need to know and you need to beat into your heads, dermatomes and myotomes. Get those in. All right. Whew. All right, we got through that marathon part. Can I shrink this up to get that T5 out of the way? Yeah, I can. There we go. Go away. You're annoying me.
So as far as the exam goes, if it's asking us for like a complete S4, S5 or above
Yep.
about loss of bladder, it would be yes, right?
Yes. If it says,
Okay.
as soon as it says complete, the patient does not have bowel and bladder.
Okay, so they're not gonna like try and trick us with all this stuff, are they? This is
No.
just so confusing to me, but
When you're looking at that question, when I look at a spinal cord question, I'm looking for where the neurological level is, right? So I'm gonna, and that would be what I'd use my whiteboard for. So I'm reading through the question. As soon as I see it says patient is a T4 spinal cord. That means they are a neurological level T4. The next thing I'm looking for is it saying complete or incomplete, because it'll say either way. If it's incomplete, that means they have some bowel and bladder and some function below that level, right? Because they have to have function below that level if they have bowel and bladder. If it says complete, pretty much everything below that level is knocked out on me. So that means I wouldn't have, if I'm talking about, again, we're talking a T2 here is what we're talking about. If I'm a complete T2, anything T3, T4, T5, T6, T7, T8, T9, T12, all the way down through, right? It's not going to function unless I have one of these zones of partial preservation. But if it says complete, I have none of this sacral sparing. My sacral levels are gone. I have no bowel and bladder. I can't control it. And that's what I'm going to get into, whether I have a spastic bladder or a flaccid bladder. But most of the times they don't ask questions about the bladder control because we're not going to be involved totally in deciding how they're going to poop and how they're going to pee. Just know that if you have somebody that's got a spastic bladder, that means the bladder is holding the fluid in until it's completely full, and then it's going to dump it all at once. A flaccid bladder or flaccid bowel means that anytime they move, gravity is going to take over. So as soon as you stand them up, everything's going to come out. So that's the only thing you kind of have to worry about. That's what I worry about when I deal with these completes is once I stand them up, there's a good likelihood, whether they're spastic or flaccid bowel and bladder, there's a good chance gravity is going to kick in and they empty out their bowels. Does that help?
okay, yeah, it just seemed like a lot of the questions that they had just on the practice exams were about like assistive devices, like what would this patient need given this level of function or whatever. So
yeah, so if we're talking, then most of the time they're going to go down in the L levels for that because they want to know, they want to know that the myotomes of the legs, right? What are they going to be missing? What level do they need to have knee flexion? What levels do they need to have dorsiflexion? What levels do they need to have hip flexion? That type
and
of
that all goes back to the myotomes.
that all goes right back to the myotomes.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so like here, if I'm talking my T2, right, I'm going to need an RGO to actually even get them to walk, reciprocal gait orthosis, because if they're complete at T2, they've got no leg function, right? I'm going to need a stander with a reciprocal gait orthosis. Remember that little device that I showed that you could stand behind them and kind of make their legs move, because they have no functional control on their own. So complete T2, they have their arms. Guess what type of assistive device we're going to look at? We're going to be looking at wheelchairs.
But it wouldn't have to be a power wheelchair because they would be able to use their arms still.
Right, exactly. Not until we get up into the high C levels do we have to worry about a power wheelchair, right?
Okay, all right.
And also remember the key thing that I told you guys before. C4 or breathe no more, right? That means at that C4 level is what innervates the diaphragm. If we don't have C4, we don't have diaphragm function. That means we don't have voluntary breathing. We can teach them gulping and other techniques, but the patient's not going to be voluntary breathing. They're probably going to be on a vent. Does that help out, everyone?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Tying into the myelomeningocele and meningoceles and spina bifida occulta, right? Because I saw that Lorena had a question that kind of ties into that, right? So let's go ahead and erase this and start a new right up here. And again, I'll post this all for you guys then. So spina bifida, right? Spina bifida itself is a problem with the closure of the neural tube. And the neural tube is when the baby is itsy bitsy, tiny and whiny, developing pile of cells, right? So that neural tube is eventually going to close off into the brain and spinal cord. So the types of spina bifida, we have the spina bifida occulta. We have, oh God, here we go. Oh gosh, please don't judge my spelling today. And myelomeningocele. There we go. There we go. So the spina bifida occulta is the least invasive or least problematic. I spelled it right, yeah, okay. Right, so this just means that somewhere along the spinal cord didn't fully close off. So we've got an open area of the spinal cord somewhere, meaning that we don't have a full vertebral body, whatever it is. The reason this is least effective is because for the most part, there are surgeries that can now help with this. And everything is still contained within the spinal cord. Right? Once we get out, this is going to tie in. You'll see how I tie this in then in a second, Lorena. The meningocele, now I have that spinal cord didn't close off. And it bulged posteriorly. But the only thing that have bulged posteriorly are the meninges, right? So your dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. So they're kind of going backwards, right? So where's my little drawing tool? Here's my little drawing tool. Draw, there we go. So with occulta, I just kind of have this break here in my spinal cord. With a meningocele, that's where I kind of get that bubble. And what fills this bubble is fluid, right? So it's filled with the fluid, meninges and fluid. So they get this weird bulge that you can clearly see on their spine. And if you ever see a kid with spina bifida, you'll see what I mean. Even the occulta has a little bit of it because you can see it usually looks like a brown hairy mole. But then when we get here, it looks like a blood blister is the best way to put it. And you definitely don't want to pop that. That would be bad, right? We don't want to aspirate it because that's spinal fluid. No aspirating spinal fluid, right? And then the worst case is the myelomeningocele. Because now we've got the meninges and spinal cord coming into that area, right? So draw. So now, here's my spinal cord. So now this is my spinal column. Now I've got my spinal cord kind of coming back in here and getting trapped in that hole. So what that's going to do is that's going to create all kinds of neural tension, right? So if I've got a patient that's got a thoracic, sometimes lumbar, definitely, I get to see a cervical. Please don't ever show me a cervical myelomeningocele. That would be bad. But thoracic and lumbar are kind of where the main areas they occur at. A lot of times when I have this going on where I've got the spinal cord kind of tied up and twisted up into this little hole, now that's putting tension, superior tension on the spinal cord. Because spinal cord is not supposed to go that long. And it doesn't grow extra. It's not like this is, It's not like this area over here is an extra length of spinal cord. The spinal cord grows the same length. It just means that now that cord is stretched over a longer area. And when that cord is stretched over a longer area, your S levels, right, S1 through S5, are the areas that get affected the most, because that's the areas of maximal neural tension. You're also going to get some at the brain as well, right? Because even if it's pulling that way, that means it's also pulling this way, which means you can get that Arnold-Chiari malformation where the brain is being pulled down through the foramen magnum as well. Because again, the spinal cord is only supposed to be a certain length. It doesn't lengthen. So it's not like it grows this extra foot of length to compensate for this. Nope, it just gets sucked in there, it gets stuck in there, and it pulls tension from both the top and bottom portion of the brain. Good news is we have testing for this now. We can see it on imaging. But you're going to lose bowel and bladder or have some bowel and bladder problems because this area is getting so much tension, right? But also because your brain up here, right? Brains. We're in Halloween season now, right? Wow, that's really hard to draw. Yum. Because your brains are getting pulled as well, that means they're not going to get normal neural development either. So this is a kind of double whammy when you have this myelomeningocele. As the brain's getting pulled, the sacral portion of the spine is being pulled, and so you're getting that kind of that double pull to the center. And so my bottom portion down here is going to be weak. My top portion up here is going to be weak, and the patient's not going to develop normal function. Most of the time that I've seen it, the patients, again, just like normal, they start off with that spastic bladder where it's not emptying until it's completely full, and then it just completely voids. Or they end up eventually flaccid, because again, all muscles, even if I've got a spastic bicep, right, I'm going to end up here, right? I can end up flaccid eventually because that muscle is just going to, the brain's going to shut off. It'll eventually contract back up here, but after so much spasticity of being pulled and so tight, the brain's eventually going to say, hey, this is not normal. I need to shut muscle control off to this. Boop, and down it goes. Until, of course, that muscle, again, spasticity doesn't equal contraction, until that muscle just finally shortens up and becomes fibrotic. And then I'm stuck back up here again. So that's what's going to happen down here with this bowel and bladder. And when the bowel and bladder becomes fibrotic, we have even bigger problems, because at that point, now they can open up to UTIs and everything else like that. So anytime you have this myelomeningocele, you're typically going to have bowel and bladder involvement. You're going to have neurocognitive involvement. And all of that's going to lead to not a very good life for the kid, right? Now, there are surgeries we can do, not us, but neurosurgeons. But this opening here doesn't ever go away. It's not like we can come down through here and cut that off and just pack it all back in there. Because if we cut through that, we're cutting off those meninges. And remember that in those meninges, right, those meninges go all the way. You know, your meninges are contiguous, meaning that the same meninges in the brain are the same in the spinal cord. So if I cut through the dura, the pia mater, the arachnoid matter in the spine, it's going to affect the dura mater, the pia mater, and the arachnoid matter up in the brain. So we don't necessarily want to cut through that unless it's an absolute dire necessity. Does that help with that question? Light bulb. Okay, thank you. Good. I went way too far into that probably, but hey, that's life. That's me. Let's see how erasing this goes. Hey, this eraser works better than the whiteboard. All right. So we covered that. We covered kind of synergy. Basic primitive reflexes. So I think I saw somebody had sent me saying that they were getting confused because some of the stuff says 9 months, some of it says 6 months. Specifically, I think the one that you had mentioned was palmar grasp reflex, right? So with your basic reflexes, when we're talking with kids, most of your basic reflexes, if you go with the 6-month rule, most of those, I'm reverting back to my basic primitive reflexes. What I tend to call the 6-month rule, if it says 6 months or less and it's something that you know they need for walking, right? If they're saying a patient still has not integrated their palmar grasp reflex and it's 13 months, at that point you're way out of the time frame. And you're right, different sources will say that palmar grasp has to be between 6 months, it can be 9 months. What I look at those is when should the baby start walking, right? So when should a baby start walking? Good, right? 12 months. That's when they should start walking. If I have palmar grasp reflex that's not integrated by 12 months, that would be a problem, right? So they're not gonna, when they ask you a question on the board, they're not gonna say, so a child has a palmar grasp reflex that is not integrated at 7 months. Is this a normal or abnormal reflex? No. What they're gonna give you is one that's way outside that, so it'll be 13 months. If they're at 13 months and it's not integrated, that's bad. That means they're not going to be able to pull up, right? They're not going to get all that normal baby development. They're not going to be able to creep and crawl. All that stuff's going to be impaired, right? So ideally, it depends upon what the development of the child is. I'd like to see my palmar grasp reflexes integrated by 6 months, but I know that I have up to 9 months before it's really considered totally abnormal. I hope that helps. So that's the thing. So that's why you're going to see different sources. A lot of the neuro books are going to give the child a little bit longer on their integrated reflexes. I will say that the boards typically go by the pediatric reflex chart that's in Score Builders. So that is a really, really good chart to look at if you're looking to study something for your primitive reflexes. So go through that one. Okay, I can go over anterior versus posterior cord. Not a problem, Brittany, thank you. Are there any other primitive reflexes you're having problems with that you guys can think of? So, you know, ATNR, STNR, tonic labyrinthian neck reflex, writing, anything like that. Placing reactions, okay. Sure, no problem. So placing reactions, and I assume by placing reactions, you're talking about like postural and stuff like that when a baby's putting in different places. Is that what you're talking about? Okay, good. So typically, again, placing reactions, depending upon the book that you look, it's, you know, up to 6 months, somewhere in that range between 3 and 6 months. Because you have hand placing reactions. Trying to think of all of them that are out there. So you have hand, you have dorsal surface of the foot, you have dorsal surface of the hands, all that stuff. The main idea with and I think I'm looking here to see if I've got it. I thought I had a really good video on this. I just have to, let me look to see if I can still find it. Give me 1 second here. I'm trying to see if I can. Because a lot of your placing reactions are eventually going to kind of tie into, let me delete this, get in here and delete this, select. Your placing reactions, a lot of those are eventually going to develop into your DTRs. Some of them. So a lot of your, like your brachioradialis reflex, your knee jerk reflex, all of those will eventually kind of integrate into your DTRs. The goal for the placing reaction is if I put a baby in a certain position and something's tapped, it's going to cause a different reaction, right? This is going to be let me get back up here, spinal cord mitigated, meaning that it's all going to be processed back to those horn cells, if that makes sense. It's mostly motor stuff, to be honest. Okay, no problem. So when I'm, you know, the most common placement reaction we're going to encounter is this one. Hold on here. Where's my thing? There it is. Don't touch, it's hot. Right? So if you take, in the first time that you put your hand down on a hot surface as a baby, you learn that's hot. It elicits a pain reaction, right? So your placement reaction to that is to pull that hand off, right? So that allows for you to develop that kind of, it's not a true deep tendon reflex, but it's a righting reflex that if I touch something hot in the future, every time I touch something hot after that, my integration becomes faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, allowing me to react quicker, and that prevents bodily damage. That's kind of the idea for those reactions. They're going to try kind of develop into those DTRs again, right? If I tap on that knee as a baby, right? So I'm tapping on the knee, I'm only going to get little reflexes, right? But eventually we'll get that full kick reflex like we get now for the patellar tendon reflex. Adults, our big placement reaction, especially if we have kids, right? We step down on a piece of Lego. The first time we step down on a piece of Lego when we have kids in the house, we learn, especially if it's barefoot. Ow, that hurts. So from then on, when we're walking around the house and we have kids, we tend to watch and maybe not put down our foot as heavily because we know there might be a Lego or, God forbid, Hot Wheels that can send us flying, right? Same thing with baby. So another placement reaction is when baby first gets that palmar grasp reflex, right? They first grab a hold of something, they place their hands down, and the fingers curl, right? That's that palmar grasp, right? That allows them to eventually do the pull, the standing. So that's kind of the idea of the placement reflex is if I do this as baby, what does it do, right? And eventually we'll condition those. Right? We're going to condition those, you know, so these are eventually going to be conditioned, meaning improved, sped up. You know, a good example here is like going back to the whole Pavlov's dog theory, right? For conditioning. Or, yeah, that's what I'm trying to get in. Okay. So Pavlov, for those of you who don't remember, would ring a bell and feed his dogs. And what he found is later on, as soon as he rung his bell, the dogs started salivating because they knew that the ringing of the bell, they had conditioned themselves to know that the ringing of the bell indicated they were going to get food. So even if he didn't give them food, the ringing of the bell would trigger a salivary response. So that's kind of the same idea here. It's going to integrate it, right? Babinski can be considered one of these kind of righting reflexes, because we don't want that kind of abnormal flow of the foot when we're walking. Auditory reflex is a placement reflex, right? So if I'm talking to you over here, you're going to turn your head towards me versus if I'm talking to you over here. Your head's going to turn towards me. Baby, same idea. It's going to be placing and looking at where their body's going to be put in space and what they need to do. It's going to tie their baroreceptors together. It's going to tie their sensory receptors together. Everything along those, and eventually it's going to even tie in kind of the pain response, right? So looking at those different cortical reflexes as we go along. Another placement reflex that we might know as an adult, the cough reflex or the gag reflex, right? If I poke you in the back of the throat, I'm placing something in the back of your throat and hit back there on that uvula, you'll either get a cough or you'll get a gag. It's a placement reflex. Does that help, Lorena? Okay, thank you. Let me find my lecture on anterior and posterior cord. Give me 1 second. I just got to go back and get it. It's on my computer here so that I can talk at least semi-intelligently about it, because that would be ideal. Just bear with me here a second. Lectures. Spinal cord injuries. Because Russell had a question about anterior versus posterior cord injuries. I assume that was dealing with spinal cord. Is that correct, Russell? Just so I make sure I'm talking correctly about what you want. Oh, it wasn't you. Who was it that said it? Oh, maybe I was wrong. Oh, it was Brittany. I'm sorry, Brittany. Oh no, I'm out of coffee now. You guys are in trouble. So let me open it up. So anterior versus posterior spinal cord, because we're taking a step backwards for spinal cord. That's dealing with what type of an injury you have, right? So if I'm my spinal cord here, right, and let's say my palmar side is my anterior side and my volar side is my posterior side. Typically, you're going to deal with the injury based upon which area is getting squished the most or crushed the most, right? So if I'm going to have an anterior cord injury, it's going to be really difficult because I have a lot of space to go back this way, and right, there's a lot of room either way to kind of get it stretched or flexed. So that's going to then determine, right, that goes back to those spinal cord tracks, right, determining what type of presentation the patient's going to present with. I can repost the spinal cord lecture for you guys if that would be helpful. Because that probably would be the best option for that, because I think, if I remember correctly, my spinal cord injury lecture had all that, and I also have that one handout that was really good for that. Let me find that here. Spinal cord injury supplement information. Is this what I'm looking for? Let's see. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. It's good to have all these resources until you can't figure out which way it is. There it is. So let me copy this image. Can I paste an image into here? Let's see. Erase. I cannot. Let's see. Hold on here. Let me save the image and open it. All right. So how do I share this now? Let's see. Close this sharing off. And share. Photos. There it is. All right. So I don't know if you guys remember this sheet here, but this kind of told you how the spinal cord injuries happened, whether they're anterior, posterior, central cord syndrome, stuff like that. Let me zoom in here some on this. How do I zoom with this thing? Just control and scroll to zoom. There we go. That makes sense. Right? So this is a really good one that talks about Brown-Séquard, right? Brown-Séquard is the hemisection of the spinal cord. Below the injury level, you have motor weakness, paralysis on one side of the body, lost sensation on the opposite. One of the anterior cord syndrome, right? Below the injury, motor paralysis and loss of pain and temperature sense, proprioception, touch, and vibration sense are preserved. And then posterior, motor functions preserved, loss of sensory function, pressure, touch, and proprioception. So a lot of times, when you're looking at anterior versus posterior, it's dealing with the motor function, right? So if when we're talking about, like I said, the anterior up here at the top, right? You're actually going to have motor paralysis below the injury level. If you're talking posterior cord, motor functions typically preserved, right? Because a lot of your motor functions are up here, whereas a lot of your sensory functions are back here in the posterior section of the spinal cord. So that's the main thing you need to know when you're looking at anterior versus posterior spinal cord is, where is my chat? Oh, there's my chat. That allows you guys to look at going, okay, so if I have an anterior spinal cord injury, I'm more than likely going to have paralysis, right? If I'm going to have a posterior cord injury, right, I may not be paralyzed, but I'm going to have all my sensation function down, which means I'm going to be more open to wounds. I'm going to be more open to stupid injuries from stepping on Legos or something like that, because I'm not going to feel when I tear stuff. So I can repost this section as well on the actual PTA 209 chat as well. So I'll post those. But this will really, this little chart here really just helps you understand, because it also kind of talks about over here, right? Stay over there. what muscles are kind of affected, where you're looking at problems, stuff like that. I saw somebody coming off mute.
Yeah, can you zoom back out really fast?
Sure. Control, which way do I, there we go. I love how they're aparalyzed. Well, technically, wouldn't that mean they're not paralyzed? Because A, not, sorry, just.
Did you give us a copy of that?
I did a long time ago in Land Far Away in 4th semester.
4th semester, okay.
Right, but it would have been in the neuro class, but it's probably black and white, so I can post the color picture for you guys. I don't know if you guys still have access to the neuro class. I don't know which ones they've taken away from you guys yet.
I don't think so. I think we only have last semester.
Okay, what I'll try to do is I'll just copy the neuro section for you guys in case there's anything you want to look through. I can do that quick.
Awesome, thank you.
But this is a great resource for this. I mean, it's a short, quick picture for it. The Score Builders, I think, has an okay section on it. I know that Therapy Ed has a little bit better on spinal cords, but you can get by with what the Score Builder. Score Builder is a lot better for strokes, and Therapy Ed's a little bit better for spinal cords. That's why I kind of tend to refer to both. But I can post this for you guys, and I may be able to even. Can I share this picture? Let's see.
If you type in the name spinal cord injury at the top in Google, it shows up too.
Oh, cool. How about that? It's in Google. Google has everything. I was just trying to see if there's no way to share. I'll see if you could actually just share it and send it over to you guys, but you cannot. But yeah, so I really like this chart. Like I said, and I can repost my spinal cord lecture as well for you guys, which went a little bit more in depth into all of it because it talked about cauda equina syndrome, neurogenic shock, and all that as well. So I'll repost that for you as well. Does that help then, Miss Brittany? I know you're the one that asked about that question. Stop share. All right, awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. So again, when you get down and you sit down for the boards, number one, take a deep breath. Because most of you are going to be totally and absolutely positively freaking out. I'm looking at you, Lorena. I'm looking at you, Anissa. So take a deep breath, right? That's the first thing you need to do. Once you've kind of taken that deep breath, the next step in your process is, okay, get your area set up the way you want it. Get the mouse where you want it, get the keyboard where you want it, so it's most comfortable for you. Yeah, that's why I didn't mention you, Drew. I knew you were already freaking out. Get your area set up. Where do you want your whiteboard? Where do you want your mouse? You have limited amount of movement because you're in a cube, obviously, right? But get it as set up as you can get it. And then go down to your brain dump. Put your, again, it's just going to be a small 8x5 whiteboard. It's not like, 10x12 whiteboard that you can write everything on. So you have to get used to writing kind of small. And go through your dermatomes, go down through your myotomes. You get skinny markers last time I went. It's been probably, last time I checked, that was probably about 2 years ago, but I think you get kind of like the markers we had. Not the big fat ones, but the ones I put in the back for you guys. Go down and write just a couple things down. Here's your dermatomes, your myotomes, right? And one of the things I told a lot of people to write is at the top of the board, remember safety, right? And if you're a person that changes your answers, you should write at the top of your whiteboard, don't change answers. Because when you change answers, bad things happen. So you want to make sure that you kind of look at that and go, okay, this is what I'm looking for. This is where I want to go with it. Here's my brain dump. This is what I want to put down. I want to put my dermatomes. I want to put myotomes. Maybe I want to put my cranial nerves. Maybe not cranial nerves. Depends upon if you know them really well. If you know your mnemonics, you don't need to write your cranial nerves, right? If you know your, once one takes the anatomy final, very good vacations are heavenly. And some say money matters, but my big brother says big business matters more. Then you don't need to write those down because you've got them down. If you need to write them down, write them down. I realize those are probably not the mnemonics you guys know, but that's okay. Use the mnemonics that you guys know. I have to be a little bit PC. So yeah, don't change answers, right? Pay attention. Lab values. Okay, so Russell asked a question. Great question, Russell. So understand lab values. On the whole, lab values will maybe at most be 3 questions. At most, usually 1. And most of the time, it's going to be about hematocrit and hemoglobin or platelets. So know your normal values for H&H and for platelets. They're going to be all over the place because this says that for women, this says that for men, right? Make a generalized rule for yourself, right? So platelets, 150 to 300K. We've talked about that multiple times. And then for H&H, just come up with a general rule for yourselves to remember. And the only thing they're going to ask is, if a patient has this value, is it okay to see them, right? And if they have normal values that are normal, yes, absolutely, it's okay to see them. Treat them like normal. You know, if they have low values that, or even high values, a lot of times at that point, the most effective thing to do is bed exercises, right? You know, they may talk, you may get a question INR, which is dealing with blood clotting. At that point, it's the main thing you want to do is protect the patient from any form of bleeding, right? But for the most part, really don't totally freak about blood lab values. At most, again, tops absolutely 200 questions, maybe 3. And most of the times you can pretty much count on those questions being your test questions for the next go around, because a lot of times they're testing to make us a little bit more technical. But lab value is the same idea. Go with the most safe answer, right? You're looking at it going, oh, well, they're not going to ask me about a normal lab value. So obviously these lab values are abnormal. Go with the most safe answers you have there for what you're doing with those lab values, right? Bed exercises are great. You know, bed mobility, stuff like that. You know, if we have an H&H count that's way low, we don't want them standing, because when we get them standing, oxygen's not being transported, and they're probably going to pass out on us. Not something we want to happen, right? So we've got to pay attention to those. Like I said, again, most of the questions you're going to get, if you get a question on lab values, H&H counts, so hematocrit and hemoglobin, and platelets for the most part, and then INR, which is your clotting factor, right? Looking at how long the ratio takes to clot. Other than that, you're really not, I mean, it's pretty rare that we get a question on white blood cells. If it is, it's probably going to be talking about some form of leukemia. And, you know, it's like giving you this really abnormal, super high number, and it's saying this patient likely suffers from, go down and look for leukemia. If it's talking for white blood cells, you're typically talking leukemia. That was my strategy on that, and it worked for me. I remember, I think I got one question on white blood cell values way back again when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And that question was talking about what disease what disease was I seeing this patient for? And it was ALL, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And I just went down and I'm like, white blood cells, leukemia, I'm done, move on. Test taking ideas when you're looking at your questions, unless you do not know the answer to the question. You come to that question and go, I have not a freaking clue. Don't mark the question for review, because what I've seen happen before is somebody goes through a 50-question section and mark 45 questions for a review. That doesn't help you any, right? Go with your gut. Your gut is usually right, and then don't change your answer. Get it narrowed down to 2, pick your answer and move on. The only time you should ever change your answer is in the case where you're like, oh crap, I meant to select C and I selected B. Go back and change that answer. Or you get 3/4 of the way through that section, you had a question about, lab values on hematocrit and hemoglobin, and now you get a question that answers that previous question, and you know that your answer was wrong. Then go back and change it. Otherwise, don't change your answer, right? Take your breaks. When it says it's time for a break, get up, get a drink, stretch your legs, move around a little bit, and then get back to it, right? I'm an abnormal person. I didn't take any of my breaks, but that's because I rarely take breaks to begin with. It messes up the flow of my brain. If you're that type of person, then don't take your break. most normal people need a few moments to get up and move, right? I noticed that when I was teaching you guys. If I rambled on for an hour and a half like I'm rambling on now, at least you guys are all at home right now, so you can stand up and do stuff, and I don't see what's going on in the background, which is probably a good thing. But when you're at the test, you can't get up and move as much. When you need to do movement in the test, get in your cube as far as you can to do the movement, because if you move around too much, they'll come in and yell at you. Right? So try to make your movements as subtle as possible. Like, oh, I need to think about the reflection question. Oh, I'm gonna scratch my head, scratch my head, and scratch my head. Make it look like you're doing something normal. Use the headphones that are there. They are clean. Don't worry. They have to retain a clean, sterile, or a clean environment. Not sterile, but they'll be cleaned after you. They'll be cleaned before you. The headphones will block out the annoying person who's taking their, licensure exam for their Series 6 and 63 financial test right beside you. Because remember, it's not only going to be PTs and PTAs that are at the testing center. Well, no PTs. PTs are on a different day. But it's going to be people that are taking like real estate exams and maybe hand therapy exams and stuff like that. I'm taking they give you a whiteboard size of a piece of notebook paper. Yep, 8 by 5. That's what I said. Yeah, about 8 by 5 whiteboard, and then the skinny marker, right? But don't make it about weight. That kind of insults the markers. They don't like to be called skinny or fat. They're just perfect size the way they are. Just remember that. All right. So I wasn't trying to minimize Zoom. What the heck? Anyway. So then once you get through a section, the other thing is, because I talked to a couple of you on this, don't dwell on a question. If you don't know the answer to the question, mark it and come back to it. And leave that question back at number 4, right? So if it's number 4, if you keep dwelling on number 4, it will affect you for number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8. And then you're likely to screw up somewhere in those 4 questions, right? Usually if you dwell on a question, it dwells for about 4 questions. If you don't know it, mark it and come back to it. Most of you have had, excuse me, most of you have had plenty of time at the end of your test to go back and review things, right? You have 4 total hours, an hour a section, right? You have time to go back and review them, right? Because you're going to have those questions that's talking about, if I'm testing the biceps tendon reflex, what motion should the elbow move into, right? You're like, oh, well, it should obviously move into pronation, right? No, flexion. Move on. Done. That question's out of the way, right? And then you come to the question that asks you about something like dysdiadochokinesia or syringomyelia or something weird like that, where you're like, I don't have a freaking clue. Those are the questions you mark, right? Those are the questions you kind of mark and go, okay, you know what? I don't know it. Don't want to put my brain through it right now. Let me come back to it. That being said, if you mark an answer and you don't answer it, make sure you go back and answer it. This isn't like the, I think it was the ACTS or the SATs, where, if you don't mark an answer, it doesn't get scored against you. If you don't mark an answer, it's wrong. So you need to go back and answer the questions that aren't answered. Don't let yourself have, 10 to 15 questions that aren't answered. If you do that, it's going to kill you. So please don't do that, right? Save yourself the stress and the problems of dealing with that, and make sure you go back and you check your questions, make sure you answered all of your questions. Trying to think if there's any other strategies I can give you. One more SCI question. Test says neurological C4. Do they have C4? Yes, if it says neurological level C4, that means they have full function, both muscle and sensory, at C4. So that means they have breathing and all the other muscles that are going to be associated with that along the way. Right? So that's the kind of idea about neurological level. It's going to be talking about what they have. Does that make sense then? The questions are always good. I love it. what if they say injury? Right, so if they say injury level, that means that's where the injury occurred. That means you're looking for something further up. So if they just say injury level, they can't ask you specifically what is functional. Well, what they can ask you about is what's probably going to be dysfunctional. I hope that makes sense. So if I say that I have an injury level of, let's just say C5, that means I know everything kind of below C5 is going to have impairments. I don't know what's fully functioning above C5. It's not even telling me that. It just tells me my injury level is there. I just know that all the stuff below C5 is going to be problems. So I'm going to most times it's going to ask you a question about a leg or something like that if it tells you about injury level, right? But if it doesn't specify injury or neurological level, they're talking about neurological level. If it is injury, it is going to say injury level. Tomorrow, preferably not. I know I can't talk all of you out of not studying. That would be a fallacy for me to think that. But I'd really like you guys to take the day, spend some time with your family, think about it. They've put up with you guys being neurotic for the past couple months and the whole time you've been in the program. It's a good time to spend some time with them. You know, get out and do a little bit. Put the books away. I locked my books in my trunk. That's exactly what I did so that I didn't look at them, because I was like, oh, maybe I'll go back and review. No, I'm not going to go back and review. Can't go back and review. I needed time. I'm from Pennsylvania. I went out for a hike in the Catoctin Mountains, which are outside of the area that I'm from. And the only thing I'll say is don't go like to the club and get cranked before you go out, right? Don't do that because you don't want to wake up with a hangover, right? I don't know if that's even the proper term anymore. Yeah, at this point, you guys have what you know, right? Spend the rest of the day, right? Take a little bit of time. What is today? Today is Tuesday. Spend a little bit more time today doing stuff, and then do something you enjoy, right? If you're in Las Vegas, go out to Red Rock and go for a hike. I don't know what the weather's like up in Vegas, but right now down here in Tucson, it's 75 degrees. Beautiful out. Perfect time to go for a hike. Some of you will say that's too cold. No, throwing yourselves off the mountain. Only unless you're like climbing down the side of it. That's okay. All right? You guys can make it through this. If you survive my test, if you survive Dr. Reskin's test, if you survive Dr. Chima's test, right? You survived all of that for a reason. You made it through. You have the ability to do this. Whether you believe it or not, you have the ability. It just depends upon if you apply that ability and if your whole brain shows up on Thursday, right? So just do it. Show up, put a green face on, right? Make sure you're caffeinated, right? But make sure you're not too caffeinated that you have to run to the bathroom every 5 seconds. That'd be bad too. But make sure you're caffeinated, make sure you have sufficient energy and sleep the night before, right? Eat a good meal the night before, because I know some of you would like to eat in the morning. You're gonna be sick and nauseated and not wanna eat. Try to eat something. I know my morning I did the stupid Belvita crackers, right? That helped me. I tested at 7 o'clock. We used to be able to test whenever we wanted to, and I chose 7 o'clock. Boy, was that a mistake. No, it wasn't. That's still normal time of functioning. But yeah, so get yourself just a little bit of something energy-wise that will tide you over. Check with the site. I think you can bring drinks in, and you have to put them in your locker though. You can't take drinks into the computer room. I know that for a fact. It varies based upon site, and I don't remember what our site in Nevada allows you to do off the top of my head. I know only take in with you what you need, right? So if you have some sort of a lucky charm, make sure it's on a necklace or something, because you're not going to be able to carry it in and be like going like this the whole time with it, right? And, not gonna be able to bring your kid with you, obviously. When I went in, and remember 2 forms of ID. Please don't forget 2 forms of ID, right? I'm not sure. Sometimes they count as school ID and sometimes they don't. Usually they'll take a credit card too. When I went like totally neurotic. I brought my social security card, I brought my passport, brought my school ID, and I brought my license. I just was kind of neurotic, go figure, me being neurotic, right? And brought everything with me. So you'll be assigned a locker while you're down there. Yeah, thank you. But just be thinking about that as you're going through it, right? Make sure that you don't take anything you don't need with you. Cell phones, stuff like that, that has to get locked up. They'll probably check those of you that have glasses, because nowadays we have the Google Glass, the little glasses with the camera on it. They want to make sure you're not using those. Depending upon where you are, they may pat you down. I've had that happen to a couple students before because they went in wearing the big baggy sweatshirts. The room is usually comfortable, but think Mr. McKeever's classroom style. So dress appropriately, or maybe dress in layers. Yep, I was gonna say that was my next one, smartwatches, right? Yes. Okay, so down in Florida, evidently they warned you. Well, that tells you about those crazy people down in Florida. Well, Florida man lives down there. That's why they obviously wanted you. They wanted to make sure you weren't gonna eat the people's faces. But yeah, so overall, just relax, guys. You got this. Take whatever you need today to brush up on, and then enjoy yourself tomorrow, right? If you need to have alcohol imbibement, tonight is the best option for alcohol imbibement so that you can recover tomorrow. All right, so don't do a ton of alcohol, don't do a ton of dancing tomorrow night. Go for a walk on the strip. The last class, they all went down to New York, and rode the roller coaster for some reason. I don't exactly recommend that. I want you all to survive to the test, but do what you got to do. I don't think there's any hockey games on tomorrow night, so there's nothing like that you can watch. And I appreciate it, Drew. Thank you very much. I try to do my best. You guys may think you're terrified. I'm just as equally terrified. I'm presenting a very common demeanor for you guys. I worry about you guys passing as well. Oh, season opening for hockey is tomorrow. There you go. There's something you can watch, right? Get hockey. Go to Buffalo Wild Wings, right? I still don't understand the purpose of chicken wings. I never have. Like, why do I want something that big when I can have something that big? That just doesn't make sense to me, but whatever. One of my friends said, if you don't have bone-in chicken wings, how do you stare at the carcass of all the things you've defeated? But whatever. I've never been to Wingstop or Buffalo Wild Wings, so I just talk about them. Wingstop's right by my house, so you would think I'd have gone there. But yeah, so do something you like. If you know that you're a hockey fan and that hockey might make you stressed or something like that, don't watch hockey. If I was going into it, I'm not going to watch an Arizona Coyotes game the night before because I just know that the Coyotes are going to lose, and I don't want to be mad about it. So just be aware of that. Anything that can do, anything you think of. Listen to some good music the night before. When you go to the center, listen to your gym playlist, right? Don't want some playlist that's going to kind of tone you down, right? Listen to your gym playlist. Get hyped, right? Get a little bit of that bounce going along while you're going down the road, right? Sing along with it a little bit. Enjoy yourselves, and then go and knock it out of the park. At this point, I've given you all the tools I can give you. You just have to do it, right? You got to Nike it. Is there any other questions I can answer? Thank you, Brittany. You guys would have made it, trust me. And Dr. C and Dr. Shima, I text them both. I let them know how you guys are doing. So they both wanted me to wish you hello, even though they abandoned you guys, and I'm the only one left with Dr. Ovreskin, right? But they did want me to wish you good luck. Still salty. Well, that's good. Use that salt. Channel that, young Padawan. Channel that anger. Use the dark side of the Force to pass your boards. Right? Channel it. But they still wanted to wish you guys good luck and stuff like that. And just think of it this way, Dr. Chicktelly went from being, where he was in our program to low man on the totem pole, and now he's teaching patho and stuff like that. So he got some payback for doing it anyway. How about that? Yeah, don't cry, right? But I guarantee, here's the deal. If you walk out of the test feeling like you absolutely probably failed it, that's normal. Don't totally freak out. right? That's the way everyone feels. Everyone walks out and feels like they were run over by a train. It's okay. You just took the hardest test in your life you've ever taken. And then now you've got the hardest week in your life. You guys will find out, you'll test Thursday. You guys will probably find out Wednesday of the following week via email. At 10:11 is about right, yeah. It's about 10:11 is when you guys will get your results. So like I said, you may get it the 10th, you may get it the 9th at midnight. It really kind of gets weird. You guys will know well before us. We don't find out for a month. So don't call me and say, how did I do? Don't call the board either, please. They know before all of us, but don't call them. They get a little testy about it. You won't get your score. What you'll get is you'll get an email, and I think if you have your phone number registered, you'll get a text message. And all it says is passed. And that's all that matters. Check. If you want to check your score later, great. As soon as you get that little blue passed box, that's when you can call me screaming and laugh. Yep. Is there anything else I can answer for you guys? Because I really wish you guys all the best of luck. And if there's anything at all, like I said, I'm prepping for communications today. That's my main goal today. So I've got a lot of classwork and prep to be sitting down here. But if there's any questions you come across, go ahead and post them. I'll post a link up to my Discord channel for if you guys use that. You can also text me if you have iMessage or anything like that by using the kmckeever@pmi.edu. That comes to my iMessage. Otherwise, email me. I have that brought up. I have about 50 different ways to contact me if you have any questions. Basically, what I'm saying. The only thing, don't call the office phone. I'm not at the office, obviously, as you can see behind me.
Thank you for taking your time out to do this for us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It's my job to help you guys, but I like helping anyway. So, and then once you just think about it. Once you guys have all officially passed, you no longer have to call me Mr. McKeever. Doesn't that make it happy? All right, guys. I guess I'm gonna wrap it up there. If you have any individual questions, I'll stick around for a few more minutes. But otherwise, you guys are free to go. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Good luck, everyone.
You too.
Everyone's logging out.